Okay, good morning, everybody. We're going to get started. My name is Todd Landfried. I'm Executive Director of Arizona for Immigration Reform, one of the sponsors of today's event. I want to thank you all for coming. I think you're in for a very informative and educational morning and early afternoon. As I hope, I'm fairly certain you've seen, we have some of the top people in the country here to discuss immigration reform from looking at kind of a federal perspective and comparing the Senate bill with efforts in the House and other types of perspectives on really how to solve the problem. It's a part of a discussion, I think, that really has been long overdue. There really haven't been, I would argue, not enough discussions of these types where it's an exchange of ideas on how do you solve the problem, not so much pointing out that there is one. We all know there's a problem, and we don't need to really debate that. But what we do need to debate is how we're going to solve the problem so we can keep our economy moving, that people who are here without documentation can come out of the shadows, and we can make sure this problem doesn't continue again and again and again as it has since 1986. Okay, here are the general ground rules for today, except for the first panel. And I'll explain why in a second. This is modeled after Oxford-style debates, and what that means is that there are two sides that are essentially going to argue about, or debate, I guess, trying to not really having an argument up here. Yeah, discussion of various issues that are relevant to immigration reform. Using as kind of a starting point with the kind of ongoing public discussions between Senate Bill S-744, which is also known as the Gang of Eight bill, and other types of legislation that are being introduced or being discussed in the House. Most of you are here. I'm going to presume that a lot of you have followed immigration or to some greater extent than a lot of other folks. So we're not really going to get into sort of the nuts and bolts of each of the bills, but really talk about from a high level and then get down into some details of what's wrong with the Senate bill, what's right with what the House approach is, where's the common ground between the two bills that could actually be discussed and agreed upon to help solve this problem. Again, when I first started out, I said, look, I think everybody can agree that the status quo is not a workable solution, and we need to do something about that. And so one of our hopes today is that this discussion will help identify some of those areas of common ground where we can debate and reach some kind of conclusion and amenable solution to this problem. So, then there's this panel. We had a couple people, actually we had three people who were going to be here today, one of whom is testifying in front of Congress today, and I guess Congress, Phoenix, Congress won. Another one is a gentleman's father got ill, and so he's with him in the hospital, which we understand. And another person has a special needs child and could not get somebody to take care of her unexpectedly. So what we're going to have is Eddie Aldrete from International Commerce Bank, and Jan Ting from Tempe University, and I, and you, are going to have a discussion about border security. And it's really one of the biggest issues in immigration reform debate. Why do people come here? Do we need to spend money, billions of dollars on a fence? Do we need to have more ICE agents? What needs to be done with the immigration laws? Do we need more visas? Do we need less visas? That kind of topic's going to be discussed later, but it's all lends to this issue of border security. Are the people coming here, are they just coming here to work, or do they have other ulterior motives? So all of that factors into what has often been, and particularly those of you who have lived in Arizona since really 2007 when the employer sanctions bill came into being, through SB 1070 and the discussions and the legal challenges after that, you're well aware that border security is one of the top issues. And so with that, what we're going to do is start with Eddie. Do you want to give a couple words about what you do and how you got sucked into this? Or?
Sure. I sort of feel like Ross Perot's running mate. Who am I and why am I here? My name is Eddie Aldrete. I'm a senior vice president with IBC Bank, International Bank of Commerce in San Antonio, Texas. I'm on the board of the National Immigration Forum. I'm on the Immigration Committee for the U.S. Chamber, and I'm also on the board of the Texas Border Coalition. Texas has the distinction of having the largest portion of the southern border, and in our particular situation in Texas, it's rather unique because we don't have an imaginary line in the sand, or nor do we have, a solid fence from one end of the state to the other. We have a natural barrier in the Rio Grande. Part of the issue that we have faced in Texas is that, unfortunately, the Department of Homeland Security didn't necessarily work in conjunction and complement the topography that we have, because there are different things that you can do with the river that will enhance not only the local situation, but our security concerns as a country. What I want to do is take a quick step back and share a couple of other thoughts with you that seem to get forgotten during this debate, because unfortunately, Washington works and Congress works in the art of the possible, and those of us who live in the real world deal with data and facts and how to solve problems, and then you solve the problems. And if they're still not fixed, well, then you keep tweaking and perfecting them until they are fixed. So one major fact that seems to get lost in this debate is if you take a look at what our workforce situation currently is. I'm a baby boomer. I was born between 1946 and 1964 as the time frame for the baby boomers. And so the biggest issue that we face is you have 10 to 15 million more baby boomers leaving the workforce than you have entering the workforce. So question number one we should ask ourselves before we draft any sort of immigration reform or border security plan is, who fills the jobs that are going to be left vacant by those 10 to 15 million people? And that doesn't even include all the new jobs that our economy creates every year. So that's question number one. Then the next thing you need to look at is our total fertility rate as a country. We've already fallen below the sustainability rate of 2.1. It takes 2.1 children per adult female for a population to replace itself. And we're at 1.93. And so if you're below 2.1, that means eventually your population begins to go in decline. Now, we're not in decline yet because our elderly people are living a lot longer than they were 50, 60 years ago. So there are plenty of examples across the world to take a look at what's happening. And as you can see from the chart that you're looking at, there's no better example in this world than Japan. Most demographers believe Japan has passed the tipping point. Even 2 years ago, many demographers predicted the demise of the Japanese people, that the last Japanese baby would be born in the year 3011. In 2011, the largest manufacturer of diapers in Japan announced that for the first time ever, adult diapers outsold baby diapers. Now, that's a recipe for economic disaster. And we kind of chuckle at that, but that's the same path that we are headed on as a country if we don't pay attention to what's happening. So let's take a look. So here you see a few of the countries that are struggling. If you look at Canada, Canada's at 1.6. So what does Canada do? Well, who wants to live in cold tundra? A lot of people don't, and so a lot of people don't move there. So you know what Canada does? They have recruitment centers. We become obsessed with law enforcement and punitive actions. And make no mistake, law enforcement is one of the most critical components of a border security plan. But if you solely obsess over law enforcement and you forget about everything else that's happening in your country, then you do yourself more harm than good. So what Canada does is they go and recruit people all over the world. We have a lot of software engineers that work for our high-tech companies that must live in Canada because we don't have enough visas to bring them in here. So we have a choice. A few years ago, when agricultural producers in California were struggling to find workers to pick their crops, and there were no workers to be found, guess what they did? They started moving to where the labor is. In this case, that's Mexico. So let's see if we get this straight. We're in this economic recession, and we're sending high-tech jobs to Canada and low-skill jobs to Mexico. So somebody please tell me what sense that makes. All those jobs could have easily stayed right here in the United States if we had an immigration system that worked to the benefit of our country. So when you take the United States fertility rate and you break that down by demographic group, and that's not changing. Can you go to the next slide? It's not changing for me here. There we go. You'll see that Asian Americans, African Americans, and Anglos are all below replacement level. Hispanics are the only demographic group that are above replacement level. And even they're declining, and they're declining at a faster rate than anyone else is. And so while my family's not typical, I'm just going to use my family as an example. This picture was taken in 1938 in Del Rio, Texas, on the border. The dapper young 14-year-old gentleman on the left is my father, who was one of 11 children. Also taken in 1938 is this picture on the right. This is my mother's family from Brownsville, Texas, also on the Rio Grande, on the southern border. My mother was one of 11. So dad was one of 11, mom was one of 11. They had 5 kids. I'm one of 5. My wife is one of 5. And we have 3 kids. 3 kids today is above the norm. We laugh at China's one-child policy, but if you're a college-educated, urban, living, white female in the United States, you have a one-child policy, but it's by preference and not by government decree. And so when we look at these issues, what happens in this debate, Todd, is that we get obsessed with the tip of the iceberg, and that's the emotional part of the debate. That is the border security part of the debate. It is the law enforcement part of the debate. And what no one's really arguing about is the bottom part of the iceberg. And we all know that it's the giant mass below the surface of the water that we cannot see, that we're not paying attention to. It's that sinks ships. It's that part of the iceberg that can sink our economy if we failed to pay attention to it. And that's made up of our declining fertility rates, our massive retirement rates from the baby boom generation, and the aging society in the United States. So we have a choice in this country. We can either continue to debate the emotional part, or we can follow Russia's example and declare a new federal holiday, a national day of procreation, where everyone is given the day off, asked to go home, close the curtains, turn out the lights, and do their patriotic duty.
Okay. Thanks, Ed.
I mean, I can go on, but
Yeah.
and just in case anyone's wondering, it's September the 11th.
Okay. Oh, is it really?
Yes.
Yeah.
12th, I'm sorry.
How do you follow a pitch for Get Busy Day? Thanks, Eddie. Well, I guess I will punt and hand it to Jan and say, okay, what's your take on that? not Get Busy Day, but as Eddie said, most of the discussions on border security all deals with that top part of the iceberg, which is actually a pretty good metaphor. You've been looking at this stuff for a long time. You worked, for the government immigration for a long time. What's your reaction to those types of arguments?
Well, first let me say that I want to thank all the sponsors and organizers and volunteers who put this event together. I think it's very timely and appropriate, and I certainly agree with the consensus that the immigration reform debate is far from over. Indeed, I would go so far as to say it's going to go on as long as there's a republic, that it is part of the American character, apparently, to be debated debating immigration, and we continue to do so. And I agree, Todd, with your introductory remark that part of our challenge is to make sure that the problems we've dealt with since 1986 don't recur again and again and again. I certainly associate myself with that. And let me say, I didn't bring photographs, but both my parents were immigrants, and I grew up in a suburb of Detroit called Dearborn, where all my classmates were children or grandchildren of immigrants from all over the world, including Mexico and the Middle East. When I was growing up, we had one of the only 3 mosques in the United States in Dearborn, Michigan. And Dearborn, Michigan has become one of the largest Muslim American communities in the United States. So, of course, I admire and respect immigrants, and all Americans should, because all Americans are either immigrants themselves or descendants of ancestors that came here from somewhere else. And I'm told that even includes Native Americans. So we're all descendants of people that came from somewhere else. The question I would submit, Todd, is, and the problem really is, given the fact that we should admire and respect immigrants, how many? How many should we bring in every year? That is the question. And to me, it's a binary choice. Either we admit everybody, or as the LULAC representative said, anyone who comes to work deserves a place. Or we say, no, we can't admit everybody. We're going to have to set a limit somewhere and enforce a limit. It's a binary choice. You have to choose one or the other. And I think at the root of our problem in the United States is we can't make that choice. We have a hard time making that choice of either saying, yeah, let everybody in. Immigration is good. More immigration is better. Let everyone in, or alternatively, we're going to enforce a limit because we can't take everybody. And we're not willing to do that either. Don't make me make that choice. There's a constant search for a third way, but there isn't a third way. Now, a lot of lawyers think they can argue both sides of every question. Me too, I think I can argue the open borders side, and I'd be happy to do so if somebody wanted to pay me to do so. I mean, I can argue the utilitarian side. What is the immigration policy that benefits the most people? Open borders. The libertarian side. What is the immigration policy that maximizes human freedom? Oh, open borders. Let everyone in. I can argue the social justice side. What is the immigration policy that would benefit the least among us? Oh, open borders, unlimited immigration. The historical side. What was the immigration policy that the country was founded on and built up on for the first century? Oh, open borders, unlimited immigration. What's the religious argument for open borders? What would Jesus's immigration policy look like? Oh, open borders, be kind to strangers, let everyone in. So there's an argument there. It's a coherent argument. And I would be unembarrassed to make that argument. And furthermore, the alternative of trying to enforce limitations is not only very difficult, but it's very expensive, right? I mean, the Migration Policy Institute came out with an estimate that we're spending 18 billion taxpayer dollars a year trying to enforce our immigration laws. That could be spent on something else. And I think that's a little high. I've argued with Migration Policy Institute, but it's a big number. We're spending a ton of money on trying to enforce immigration laws. And we're not doing a great job of it. I mean, the problem is demand exceeds any limit that we try and put in place. The demand for immigration opportunities is greater than any limit we can set. We all know there's poverty in the world. It's aggravated by the worldwide recession. People want better lives, and the revolution in communications gives them information as to where they can find better lives. In the United States, in Europe, in Australia. The problem is not limited to the United States by any means. And if you read the papers, a diminishing number of us do, I know, but we know this is a problem all over the world. And modern transportation makes immigration, whether legal or not, easier than it has been at any time in our past. This panel is on border control, so let me just offer some comments on border control. I don't think it will work. I think one of the questionable parts of the Senate bill is the ton of money they're shoveling out for additional border control. And it won't work because it's too hard. The Office of Refugee Resettlement, which is part of the State Department, has said that in FY 2013, 23,500 unaccompanied minors were apprehended. 23,500 children were apprehended entering the United States without adult accompaniment. That is a situation that is continuing to be out of control. We also know that nearly half of the undocumented population in the United States did not enter by violating the border. They entered with visas, entered legally, and overstayed their visas. So spending a ton of money on border control isn't going to solve that problem. And finally, one of my colleagues at Temple, former colleague actually, used to say, the poor people of the world may be poor, but they are not stupid, that they are as capable of doing cost-benefit analysis to determine what's in their own self-interest as anyone in this room, he used to say. And they do it all the time. And if they're trying to decide whether to enter the United States without documents, they do a cost-benefit analysis. What are the risks? What are the costs of doing that? But what are the benefits that they get? And if we want more illegal immigration, if we want to deal with this problem again and again and again, all we have to do is lower the costs, maybe through prosecutorial discretion, and raise the benefits, maybe through mass legalization. If we want to restrict illegal immigration in the United States, we have to do just the opposite, raise the costs and lower the benefits. It's not that complicated. The problem, as I said at the outset, is that we refuse to make the choice of either saying we're for unlimited immigration and all the benefits that it brings, or that we're prepared to enforce a limitation somewhere. And, you know, we'll have to let Congress write what the limitation is because there's no better way to do that. We're not willing to do either one of those things. We keep searching for a third way. How about this? Let's keep the limits that are currently on the books, but let's not enforce them, right? And then when we have a whole growing number of people who are undocumented in the United States, let's throw up our hands and say, there's nothing we can do. We have to legalize them, right? Is that a good third way? Is that a good way that's going to prevent the problem from happening again and again and again? I don't think so.
Okay. Would you like to respond?
Sure. I mean, just a couple thoughts. Number one, again, when you take a look at deciding, and I guess I don't agree with the fact that you're either for open borders or you're for, shutting the borders down. Consider this: no national economy, no corporate structure is based on stagnation. They're all based on growth. If companies are not growing, then their competitors are. And so if we want to create jobs, that requires growth. Growth requires a larger workforce. And if we're not producing a native-born workforce, then we must import the human capital that is necessary to keep our economy growing. We're in a global race for talent. It makes absolutely no sense that a corporation today is considering the building of a floating barge off the west coast of the United States in international waters so that software engineers can live there by night and ferry in by day to go work at Google and Intel and eBay. That's because we have an arbitrary number that we established on how many visas we should give. Software engineers are a dime a dozen in Canada. So the status quo continues to favor Canada. Now, we can be kind and benevolent to our next door neighbor, Canada, or we can choose to be a little selfish and do what's in the best of our own interest as a country and bring that human capital and that talent here to the United States. The reality is that workforce has to come from somewhere. And if you look around the world, what other countries are doing, they're all recruiting that talent. Now, slowly we're beginning to slide in certain areas. The reality is that last week we came out again with the standings, national standings in math and science and reading, and we moved down a few notches. And so if we're not able to create that talent here at home, because we have fewer students that are going into the STEM fields of science, technology, engineering, and math, then we need to import that expertise so that we can continue to keep our economy moving. You know, you have certain countries that struggle with this. I've already mentioned a couple. You know, Russia shrinks by about 700,000 people every year. Their population declines. Japan continues to struggle. They outsource their engineering work, half of it to Vietnam and half of it to India. What is outsourced? Because there aren't enough people that are staying there. And then once you reach a certain point, your younger workforce tends to leave the country because of the declining number of opportunities. And I want to just touch for a moment on what's happening in Mexico. This is another part of the debate that people don't talk about. Most people assume that Mexico is a third world country. They are not. Most people's perception of Mexico as a third world country is rooted in data that goes back to 1950, which is usually about the year that their college professor was born. And so most people see the Mexico as being, or they see the world as either you're a developing nation or you're a Western nation. You're in the developing world or the Western world. And the definition is usually that a developing world is a larger families and shorter lifespan, and the Western world is smaller families and longer lifespan. Let me tell you what's happening in Mexico right now. Reshoring is taking place. The offshoring manufacturing that used to take place in China has now lost their competitive price advantage, and they're no longer really interested in being the low-cost producer for small, inexpensive items that they manufacture. So Mexico is now the beneficiary of that. Mexico's unemployment rate is 4.5%. Ours is between 7 and 7.5%. Mexico graduates 3 times as many engineers per capita as we do in the United States. So the reason that we have a net migration of 0 is because Mexico's economy is flourishing. They're now being referred to by The Economist magazine as the Aztec tiger. Recently, President Peña Nieto announced that he is going to look and consider and attempt to push through his Congress the exploration by international companies of their offshore oil reserves. If we build any more border fencing in the United States, it should be where the barbed wire is faced inward, because you're going to see a massive exit of people who want to leave the United States and go back home. And the reason is, if you have a choice of being away from your family or being with your family, you're going to choose to be with your family. And as Mexico's, the irony here is that Mexico's economy is flourishing despite all the cartel violence that's occurring. Imagine where Mexico would be without that violence. But the reality is that their economy is booming. And so I would ask any member of Congress who's afraid that if we pass immigration reform, that there's going to be another tidal wave of immigrants coming from Mexico. My question is, where are you going to get them from? Because they're not going to be coming from Mexico. And I do agree with you on the border security portion, because today we spend more enforcing border security than we do all other federal law enforcement combined. And the reality is, what do you want to do? Do you want to punish the people who come here illegally? Or would you rather reduce the incentives and prevent them from entering illegally to begin with? Today, what we do is, it's the equivalent of having a speed limit of 25 miles an hour on an interstate highway. What's going to happen? people are going to speed because that speed limit is out of whack with the ability to move people in an orderly fashion. So is the answer to hire more police officers and more state troopers to issue tickets and to punish people for speeding? Or is it to set the speed limit at a level that allows for the orderly flow? Well, we have arbitrarily set numbers on the number of visas that we give as a country. And so we do end up becoming a magnet because we demand that labor. And much of that labor, in the case of the United States, comes from Mexico. So we have a choice. We can continue to fortify the border, or we can reduce the incentives for them to come illegally by allowing people to come if we have a job for them. If we need more bricklayers, then we should raise the quota on bricklayers. If we need more brain surgeons, then we should raise the quota on brain surgeons to be able to satisfy our economy so that we don't have shortages in massive industries. And I'm going to give you two examples.
Briefly.
The Border Patrol is one. The GAO announced in 2012 that 51% of all Customs and Border Protection agents were eligible for retirement. So every time Congress says, let's double or triple or quadruple or quintuple or whatever the size of the Border Patrol, my question is, where are you going to find them? Because for everyone you hire, you're going to lose one to retirement. The second one is the aerospace assembly line workforce. 40% of all aerospace assembly line workers were also eligible for retirement in 2012. So as we continue to ramp up and engage in more international activities and build the military, the problem is who's going to build that next phase of fighter jets when we have too many people leaving the assembly lines?
So Jen, what's your reaction to basically the argument that Eddie is making, that we clearly have a need for certain types of labor, that there are very clearly obviously not enough Americans want to do, and is there some point at which we have to acknowledge that and make adjustments in federal policy to get those types of workers? Because if Mexico and Point South have been the origins for those types of workers, and they're not going to be coming here anymore, is it really a completely rational argument to say that we're going to have this continued flood when there isn't? The math isn't there to show that there is a flood.
Well, let me first say, no one is advocating closing the border. And indeed, if we do nothing, what we're left with is the most generous legal immigration policy in the world, bar none. The United States each year has a complicated formula for legal immigration in the United States. Marco Rubio says we're the best nation for immigrants in the world, and he's right. We admit every year for permanent residents in the United States with a clear path to full citizenship, about 1 million immigrants every year. We admit more green card holders, permanent residents with a clear path to full citizenship than all the rest of the nations of the world combined. And as I testified to Congress in April, the Senate Judiciary Committee, that is a immigration policy worthy of American values. We are a nation of immigrants, and we ought to be in the lead in admitting more immigrants than all the rest of the nations of the world combined. Now, on the issue of growth and the need for a larger workforce, it's entirely reasonable to say, 1 million, that's not enough. We need more. Okay, that's a rational conclusion. How many? How many more do we need? That's the question. And what kind? More brain surgeons? No problem. All right, more engineers? If you can demonstrate a need, although I think there are a lot of American engineers that would say they're out there looking. Okay, no problem. The question before us is this: is there any limit that we would be willing to enforce Is there any limit that we would be willing to enforce to the point of saying we're going to turn people away, not because they're bad people? In fact, they're a lot like our ancestors, but we're going to turn them away because we have a limit, and admitting them would exceed that limit. And if the answer is no, there's no limit at which we would deny someone who comes to work a place, then why can't we just say we're for open borders? We're for unlimited immigration to the United States. It's all good, right? Why can't we say that? Again, it seems to me it is a binary choice. Either we're prepared to enforce a limit somewhere. What, 1 million, 1.5 million, 2 million? Is there some limit that we're willing to enforce, or is there no limit we're willing to enforce? In which case, let's say unlimited immigration, save a ton of money that we're spending on enforcing our immigration laws, and devote it to better schools for kids, better health care, right? Fund the Affordable Care Act properly. There are a lot of things we could do with $18 billion a year. But let's make up our minds. And I submit to you that our inability to make that fundamental choice, no limits or limits, is at the root of why the immigration debate seems like such a mess.
Actually, I'm really going to try and get us back on schedule here. Is there anyone from the audience have a question they'd like to ask? Brent?
My question is to Jan. Since this is about the border enforcement side of things, border enforcement costs should undergo the same cost-benefit analysis that we apply to other types of law enforcement. Migration, $1 billion according to them. But I think all agree that that is more than all other types of federal law enforcement combined. In fact, we imprison more immigrants than all other federal types of prisons. The question is this really, because when you hear talk about it, it's like it doesn't matter how much it costs. We have to put the whole U.S. Army on the border, do it. You know, there's no limit. So you said, we need to pick a limit on immigration. Well, what's the limit on enforcement?
Yeah, I agree.
Or is it the case that this is not a theological question? Spend whatever it takes.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if you have a comment on that, because it does seem to me that there are other types. Do a lot with LULAC, other types of concerns about those problems to try to protect Americans, as we are to try to keep people from coming in.
Absolutely. There has to be a limit, right? And my quibble with the Migration Policy Institute is, I think we're spending more like $15 billion on immigration enforcement, but either way, it's a gigantic number. And we have to apply principles of cost-benefit analysis. Obviously, there's a finite limit on what we can or want to spend. Is there, as you suggest, another way to get more bang for the buck? Would, for example, interior enforcement be more cost-effective than border enforcement? Certainly one of my objections to the Senate bill is the ton of money that they seem to be shoveling at border enforcement. And the reason why they do that, by the way, is because there's no constituency opposed to spending money on border enforcement. There are obviously constituencies that would object to more spending on interior enforcement of our immigration laws, but there really isn't a constituency opposed to spending more money on border enforcement. So if you need to ameliorate the concerns of people that we're going to have an immigration problem, you shovel another, couple of $1 billion at border enforcement. No one objects, and indeed the industrial complex that supports all the technology, they applaud. They think that's great, that we're going to spend more money at the border. So I do think we need to take a critical eye and say, is that money well spent? Can we spend that money in more efficient ways that are more beneficial to the United States, like schools and health care, rather than that? And that's one of my objections to the Senate bill.
Is there a one of the things that I've been trying to kind of figure out is what would be the impact of immigration reform, reforming the visas, reforming the process on border security. Setting aside for a second the notion that, we need to have some kind of finite number, but let's just say, a lot of people keep talking about we need to have market-based quotas. However you want to define what the market demand is for whether it's brain surgeons or agriculture workers, construction workers, doesn't really matter. But if reform meant that those who wanted to come here had a legal process that they could go through, come through the front door like everybody talks about, and so they didn't come crossing through the desert, do you think that would contribute to less pressure on the border and then less need for more border agents, less money for fences, that kind of stuff?
Well, I think unlimited immigration would solve all of those problems. Unlimited immigration is the ultimate market-based immigration system, right? Let people apply the cost-benefit analysis to whether they're better off in the United States or better off in Mexico. People will make the right choice. They can do it. And the same of people from other countries. Let them make the right choice as to where the best job opportunities are for them. That's what unlimited immigration is all about. And I think if we're really serious about let the market decide, why wouldn't we embrace unlimited immigration and say, yeah, let the market decide. These people are not stupid. They are not going to make a decision that's against their best interests. They're going to make the decision that is in their best interest, and if you believe in the hidden hand of Adam Smith, we all benefit from that, right? So for the people that are proponents of market-based immigration, it seems to me unlimited immigration is the way to go. But if you can't go there for whatever reason, the alternative is enforcing some sort of numerical limit. It's tricky to get the number right because there are all these vested interests that want to argue one way or the other way. You have to deal with a Congress. And Congress, has its own interests and concerns at stake. But that's what the political process is all about, is getting the number right, getting the right kinds of visas available. And, I don't have a simple solution for that. So you can either do it the easy way or the hard way. The easy way is unlimited immigration. The hard way is let Congress develop a formula as to how many immigrants we're willing to let in every year.
Okay, I'm going to take two quick. Please make them brief. Then I'll give Eddie, feel free to jump in. Sheridan?
And question or observations concern the binary character. When we had open borders, we had lots of territory. It was a virgin situation. We had cultural excuse me, thank you. We had cultural systems of different types around the country. There's plenty of room to grow. And what I think we're missing, and we often get into a question of racism, but I think it's really more about cultural change. So that's the driver, that the resistance to open borders is how much cultural change can we harmoniously absorb in this process. And so there's this movement, the argument currently is citizenship or no citizenship, which it's an attempt to make a compromise that might work. So what's the difference for a family that comes to the U.S. with a green card? The parents may not gain citizenship, but the children do. There's a potential a bargain there. So it's not so much about the mechanics, but more about the underlying fundamentals. And so do you see a difference, and I'm challenging the idea that it's binary. There are understandings as to why open borders would not work, and that would be the concern of runaway cultural change, that we can't absorb harmonious social conflict. Could you address that point?
this is a continuation of a discussion we started at dinner last night.
Briefly. Briefly.
But
Come back to it later.
let me say, I often ask my students when I teach citizenship and immigration law, what was our immigration policy for the first century of the Republic? And some of them will say, well, open borders, right? Unlimited immigration. And that was our policy, for the first century of the Republic. This country was founded on open immigration, that anyone in the world who wanted to come here could come here and contribute to building a republic. And I ask the students, how'd that work out? How'd that work out, that open immigration policy? And the answer is, we built a great republic out of nothing, right? I mean, that open immigration policy resulted in a great republic, the most, in a century, the leading industrial nation in the world was built out of wilderness. And so, if it was such a great success, the third question is always, if it was such a great success, why did it change? Why did it change? And that's a whole course, by the way, so I'm not going to venture into that. But think about that. Why did it change? If it was such a successful policy, if we had no problem absorbing all these different cultures and people coming in and taking their contributions and the immigrant innovators that we benefited from during our first century, why did that change? So think about that. In response to your specific question, I mean, is it binary? Yeah, I'm still convinced that it's binary in that either you say, yeah, let's embrace that unlimited immigration, or say, no, there's got to be a limit for whatever reason, our cultural fears or whatever, our paranoia about being flooded with immigrants. It could be anything, but the alternative is to say, no, we're going to enforce a limit on how many people we come in. What is the appropriate limit? It's very hard political discussion. What kinds of people are we going to allow in within our limit? We're going to have that. That is the alternative. It seems to me, and it's the harder way to go is saying we're going to set a limit. But again, I say if we do nothing, we're left with the most generous legal immigration system in the world, bar none.
Okay, actually, I'm going to have to take it back one more question. We've got to get back on the schedule, and I just got a text from the guy who's Skyping in for the next panel going, where are you? Anyway, Eddie, do you have any closing remarks?
I'll just leave you with this one thought. While I don't support complete and total open borders, I will share one market condition with you. There's a small community in Germany. Germany, similar to Japan, struggling with their fertility rates and their demographic situations. There seems to be a surplus of prostitutes in this community, and there is a shortage of younger men. So demographers in this community are saying that the prostitutes technically are underemployed. Well, the other thing that occurred is there is a surplus of older men in this community and a shortage of nursing home nurses. So this community decided to connect the dots and retrain the prostitutes. And so one of the leaders of the community said, it's not bad when you think about it. First of all, they're people-oriented. Number two, they're not afraid of human contact. And number three, they have a great bedside manner. So problem solved in that community.
All right, thank you. Please thank Eddie Aldrete and Jan Ting.